So hello, everyone. Welcome to the Minorities in Cybersecurity Community Call this month. My name is Mary Chaney, your chairman, CEO, and president, and resident everything for the organization. So this month we're going to have a conversation that's near and dear to my heart. But first, of course, we're going to go through the agenda and do updates. So the leadership quote of this month is, when we don't have hard conversations, we end up lying. If we aren't sharing our truth, we are automatically sharing a lie. I really like this quote, and it goes with our discussion today and what we want to now start to break some barriers down and talk about. So, again, the community call rules. All calls are scheduled for the fourth Friday of the month. This is our last call of the year. Callers will be initially muted, and since there's not that many of you out there, it's not muted right now, so we'll just have an open dialogue. Our Chatham House rules, of course, apply to all of our calls, meaning no attribute. You can feel free to discuss with anyone what was said, but no attribution should be given to whoever shared that information with you. Of course, be professional and respectful at all times. Everything is a reflection of your brand. So, again, community updates. Of course, you guys know about my social media and liking us at Mike Leadership on LinkedIn and Twitter. That my social media coordinator, my son, Mr. Van L. Chaney, has not been doing his duties as of late, but we'll still keep him on there. He got his first money from his first subscribers, and he's failing on me right now. But the positive approach with volunteer outreach, I've entered into a partnership just today, actually, with the University of Texas at Dallas. So essentially, I should be able to now, once I enter into this program, get more volunteers to help us here locally to try to grow our organization here in the Dallas market. And so, website update, the Mike job board is up, and I know you guys, it's been up since we started, but what we have done this week as well is that we are entering into a partnership with ZipRecruiter, where ZipRecruiter is now going to start sharing specific cybersecurity and privacy job descriptions on our job board. We're waiting for that technical integration to happen, so we'll be getting more information on being able to post jobs. Membership update. Again, the membership pricings are there for you to understand. Corporate memberships starting at $3,000. For that hasn't changed. If you have any questions, please, feel free to reach out to me. Again, the conference schedule. If you didn't get the email, which I don't know if everybody did, I know I posted on social media, but September 22nd to 24th, 2020 is what we're working on for the conference. We want to. I'm currently working on the agenda, working with an event planner to decide how the location and everything like that, and working on actual content. Also, another thing that I did this week, Secure World is I'm doing some speaking events with them, and they want to partner with us to be able to give discounts to training. So if you are in any of these markets, at Charlotte, Philadelphia, Boston, Houston, my hometown of Cincinnati, Ohio, Toronto, Kansas City, Atlanta, or Chicago, they have events coming up in 2020, which they will be more than happy to share a discount code for those in those particular markets to be able to attend those events, those training sessions at a discounted rate. Let's see what we got here. Of course, our community calls, no call in December. I did post, and we had the opportunity to post our On the Mic with Board interview series with our MC, Lola Ajayi, and those are now posted on our About Us page on our website. So you can go and listen and learn about each of our individual board members and why they feel that being a board member in Minorities in Cybersecurity is important to them. The monthly Leadership Book of the Month Club, we did not get a lot of attendance out of it starting out when we started out in October. So we're going to shelve it for the year and pick up and do a push in January. We're really starting now to focus more on membership development to start to get people engaged. So once that picks up for us, I think we'll be able to do the Leadership Book of the Month Club more effectively. And hopefully you guys are also receiving our monthly newsletters. So getting to the November topic, our topic of discussion for today is Beyond DNI, the challenges we face with building relationships with the other side. And with us today we have Catherine Allen, who is the chairman and CEO at the Santa Fe Group, and most importantly, one of my mentors, a very, very important part of me and my family's life. So I will let you guys introduce yourselves here shortly. And also we have with us Tanis Cornell, who is the CEO of EWF International, which has here locally in Dallas, has a wonderful background that I actually am going to allow them to talk about themselves. So I'll start with you, Kathy, if you want to talk to the group about who you are and how you're here to inform us. Hello?
I was on mute. Sorry.
Oh, there we go. I was like, no, I didn't mess up. Okay.
So thank you, Mary. As I was saying earlier, I think this is a great topic, and Janice does too. So hopefully we'll have interaction on this call. Mary's one of my very favorite mentees. We met, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago now, maybe longer, at the Executive Women's Forum, and I heard her speak, and I thought, wow, I've got to meet that woman. And so I went up and introduced myself to her, and that was it. So and when she talked about her family, put it this way, I invite her mother and her kids to come visit me in Santa Fe, and then maybe we'll invite Mary, so you'll know what the situation is. Anyway, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background because I think it's important in understanding on how you build trust between someone who is of a different nationality or a different ethnic background, or, you know, the white, black, Asian, Indian, however it is, what it is, how to identify people that I think you can trust. And we all know, you know, trust is a very important thing, and if it's broken, it's one of those things very hard to fix. I have an exercise that I encourage people to do, and I'll come back to that a little bit later as we go through the questions. But I grew up in a very small town in Missouri, Perry, Missouri, near Hannibal. We had an integrated high school because we were so small that there weren't other options, and I'm of the age during the Civil Rights era. My father, who was there was a banker, a lawyer, a doctor. My dad was the banker, small-town banker, and he used the bank to leverage a lot of social justice issues and things good for the community. So he was on the school board to address any issues that came up, racial issues that may have come up. He was involved in the Civil Rights era. This is again in the 50s and 60s. He brought Medicare into the state, the first public health nursing home. He was friends with the Democrat. He's a Democrat. It was involved nationally in public policy and politics, and again, always focused on inclusion and equal opportunity for everyone. And when you grow up in a small town, first of all, you have to learn how to get along with people you might not even like, but you have to learn to look for their good side and what it is and ways that you can work together. And that was an invaluable tool for me. My father and my mother were both great role models. So I went on to university at the University of Missouri. I, at the time, majored in retailing because it was kind of the only way women could be in business at that time. And I went on to do my doctoral work in international business. And again, mind you, I'm coming out of a town of 800 people in Missouri, but I really wanted to be part of the global world, and I really wanted to understand other cultures and be involved in that. So I spent time, I do a lot of traveling, but I spent time even when I was doing my doctoral work in Japan and France and in Asia. And I also am a big proponent of diversity from an intellectual point of view, an innovation point of view, and a creativity point of view. So I've done research and work with the Santa Fe Institute here in Santa Fe, with women corporate directors, with the International Women's Forum, all in looking at how to let businesses know how it's in their best interest to have diverse boards of directors, diverse C-suites, diverse workforces, because that's how you become more creative, and it's how you meet the needs of this rapidly changing environment where innovation and creativity is critical. So I grew up with a great understanding of that in my work today. I own a cybersecurity third-party risk company. My workforce is diverse. Our membership is diverse. I'm a big proponent of why it's important to tie diversity, not just for social justice reasons, but also for creativity and innovation reasons. So that's kind of my background. I sit on corporate boards, and I have this cybersecurity company, and I love mentoring people, and I'm active in politics behind the scenes in New Mexico and nationally, and I also am involved in a number of social justice nonprofits.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing, Kathy. Tanis?
Hi, I'm Tanis Cornell, CEO of EWF International, which stands for Executive Women's Forums International. And our mission is to elevate the careers of ambitious women. And that's across all races and ethnicities. And not just because, we as women think we deserve a place, but because there's a true business imperative for companies in ensuring that they have better gender balance in their leadership teams, because what we know from now many, many long-term studies that companies who have greater gender diversity in their senior leadership teams outperform their competitors financially. They drive better innovation, and it started out with looking at women on boards and the fact that public companies that have 3 or more women on their boards outperform financially, and then many studies have been done to really look at that gender balance inside companies as well. And so our mission is to help companies understand that that's good for business when women are an integrated, equal part of the leadership team, from entry-level management positions all the way through the C-suite, and then their companies are going to perform better. So we have a variety of leadership development programs that really focus on developing the pipeline of women leaders all the way through their career life cycle. So we have programs from the front end of a woman's career through the C-suite level side of a woman's career. And today we operate our public programs in Dallas, Texas, but we do a lot of work with companies internally that are developing their internal programs for women that take us to different parts of the country as well. My particular background, prior to being in leadership development, is I was an executive in several technology fields, not specifically cybersecurity, but telecom, IT, software. I was a partner in a startup software firm that's still around today, and also worked in the Fortune 500. So a span from small companies to large, but certainly saw firsthand in my own experience and that of my peers some of the struggles that women went through in their rise to the leadership ranks. And I can't count the number of meetings along my career path where I was the only female in the room. So I've experienced that professionally and personally, and so I have a personal passion for what we do, and have been associated with EWF for almost 7 years, but been the owner, co-owner, and CEO for the past 2 years.
Well, thank you, ladies, so much for introducing yourself. Like I said, group, we get some wonderful, wonderful people to come and speak to us, some very unique backgrounds and timely, because it's all about sharing experiences. It's all about understanding how we can now collectively move forward from a leadership perspective. So I wanted to get into a couple of the questions that I sent you guys. I think the first one, and I guess we could start with Kathy. Describe your views for the differences between diversity and inclusion.
So diversity for me is just saying it's identifying the importance of differences. And those differences may be gender, they may be ethnic, they may be cultural, they may be economic, they may be geographic, they may be even the way you think, the difference between an introvert and an extrovert. But there is so much research out there now. And again, I mentioned the Santa Fe Institute, Catalyst, Morgan Stanley, McKinsey and Company are seeing more and more. First of all, looking to nature, and you look at if you look at both creativity and survival or sustainability, it's where there's diversity. So I see diversity is just identifying the differences between people. Inclusion is a different thing. That's saying that all people have an equal opportunity or an equal chance to participate, that there may be not barriers to entry, but there may be steps that people have to take to be involved, which might be a certificate or a graduate degree or experience in a certain area. But the inclusion to me means providing an opportunity and for an equal or level playing field for everyone to get ahead. And that's what the U.S. is based on.
Yeah, absolutely. Tanis, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'll add a couple of things. Kind of the way we think about diversity, inclusion includes diversity, but it's more than diversity. Diversity may mean that you're in the room. It might even be that you're at the table. But inclusion means you also have a voice and you're being heard. And it's why, a lot of the earlier studies when public boards started adding just one woman to their board, they could do a check mark. Oh, we've got diversity. We have a woman on the board. But what typically happened is that became the token, and that woman didn't necessarily have influence on that board. When there were two women on the board, it's like, oh, well, that's what the women think. But suddenly when there were three or more women, now there was inclusion, and they were just a part of the overall planning and strategy of that board. And that's why they found that kind of the three and above, there was a big difference, that their voices were being heard, they were truly included, and they began to see true financial results by having true inclusion as opposed to simply diversity.
Okay, I'm going to throw you guys a curveball. I thought of this question as you guys were talking, and it wasn't something that, I pointed out before, but have you guys seen in your experiences effective ways of measuring for inclusion?
Yes. It's part of it is, let's say, it's an effective one way. It's not the only way, because you always have to get to the culture of an organization to really understand if there's true inclusion. But you can look at how many people are at the board, and again, this could be gender or ethnic or racial or other kind of diversity. How many people are in the board level? How many people are in the C-suite? How many people are in the pipeline to the C-suite? How many people are a portion of the population of the workforce? What kind of work-life balance programs do they have? Where do they recruit to get, new people? And so there are some concrete things you can look at of the attempts of an organization to be inclusive of diversity, but then you have to look to the culture to see if it really works. And I'll give just a brief, interesting thing. I'm was on an energy board, El Paso Electric, and Morgan Stanley has a group of women board directors in the energy field, and they had us present, their investment group present to us, because they had, and it was all white males, were doing research in, who are their top 20, where the top 20 organizations that they ought to be investing in. And they were doing it for pure, financial investment point of view, but they were looking at different characteristics. So one year they did women, and they looked at women in the C-suite, at the board level, in the pipeline, in the organization, the work-life balance, and what other kind of programs they had to be inclusive of women. And it turned out that, and they did it, again, not for any social justice or this is the right thing to do. They were just looking at that. It turned out that the very top performing organizations they had met all that criteria. So today, Morgan Stanley, their top 20% investments all look at that gender balance in each of those areas, and they get the cultural area by looking at the pipeline issues, the work-life balance issues, and the programs that help women directly, whether it's a lot of times they have internal to the organization a group around women. So I just thought that was interesting. They're going to do in the future one that looks at racial differences and ethnic to see how that impacts the performance of firms. But I just thought that was an interesting way to look at how you can kind of effectively look at whether or not an organization is inclusive.
Yeah, that sounds good. Absolutely. Tanis, did you have anything to add to that about measuring inclusion?
Yeah, very similar comments that it's hard to drive specific metrics for culture. The culture is how a company behaves, the values that they hold, and so that's much harder to drive a metric there. For diversity, it's much easier because you can actually look at how many women, how many minorities do you have in your various management ranks. And it is interesting that Kathy already touched on this, that almost all of the major financial services companies have really developed specific investment strategies around companies that have greater gender and diversity balance in their leadership teams, because they see they perform better. And I was trying to remember who ran the study, and I couldn't pull my notes up quick enough, and I can't pull it out of my head, but there was an interesting study that they looked over a period of 12 years. They compared companies that were led by female CEOs. There were 80 companies led by female CEOs that they tracked over, I believe it was somewhere between 5 and 10, maybe 12 years, and compared their performance to the S&P 500. And the difference in performance was pretty astonishing as a collective group. And that's not saying that women were better than men, but when you had, inclusive women at the top, the financial performance was significantly better. Now, did it mean that every one of those 80 female-led companies outperformed the S&P 500? No, but as a collective group, it was pretty astounding statistics. And so there's been enough of these kinds of studies that were also long-term, done over a period of years, that the results are really clear. And so when you simply look at it from a financial perspective, it now makes sense to have strategies in looking at diversity and inclusion as part of that investment strategy.
That's great. That's wonderful. And I know there are a multitude of studies out there, and it's so their value proposition is there. I've worked in some tough cultures, and as
yes.
I've shared with both of you, the challenge that I faced, coming from, inner city Cincinnati, Ohio, where everybody pretty much looked like me, and trying to integrate that into my career, right, based on my experiences. I think it was when I got to junior high is when I started getting a little diversity, but when we start talking about trust and trying to build trust. You know, I did not come out into my career with a lot of trust towards white people in general. It was something that was instilled in me at a young age from family and, social economic issues and cultural issues and what I saw around me. So I didn't have a lot of trust. So as I was going through my career, it became a challenge to try to understand how to identify those people that I can trust. Now, believe you me, I've made some mistakes. I've trusted some people that I should not have trusted at all, and those were learning experiences. So, I mean, when you think about your own experiences, I guess I'll throw this to you first, Tanis. When you think about your own experience with mentoring and networking with minorities and women, what advice would you share with them on how to build or how to go about building meaningful relationships when you could potentially have a bias against a particular culture to begin with?
One of the things we talked about, and I just moderated a panel discussion on a similar topic at a women's conference out at Southwest Airlines, and we were talking about mentoring and the fact that you need multiple mentors/sponsors in your careers, and you need to be intentional about looking for people who can teach you different things and provide you different perspectives. And it isn't always about somebody older than you. Sometimes a mentor might be someone younger than you, that maybe that person younger than you can help you understand the views of that particular population as they're coming into the workforce, or they may be really savvy in technology and teach you things around technology that you need to know, and that you need to look at that mentorship holistically. And that includes male mentors, female mentors, diverse mentors, and to intentionally seek to develop a relationship with people that are different than you to help you understand perspective. And that you have to find ways, and I don't think you just walk up to someone and say, oh, would you be my mentor? Most of these relationships grow best by either organically or seeking someone out to have a dialogue with them on a specific subject that you might learn from them, and that helps you develop a relationship which can then grow from there. But, I take as an example, Mary, we had this really robust conversation over lunch where we were just sharing perspectives and what had happened in our lives and in our careers and how that impacted us. And when you truly stop to listen to someone and their experience, and you have that empathy for what they have dealt with, and you develop a genuine relationship with that person, now you've got someone that you can bounce something off of, you can seek advice from, and that's when we really begin to gain understanding. And looking for those authentic relationships, and you have to kind of get out of your comfort zone and sometimes take a bit of a risk and seek out people different than you. We had a panel discussion at our 20-year company anniversary that we did recently, and we had 3 males on the panel to talk about gender diversity and their perspective. And one of these men was sharing that he requires, that he's really implemented a whole mentoring program within his staff, and he requires all of his leadership team and up-and-coming leaders to have one male mentor and one female mentor, and so that they get this diversity of thought. And he looks at diversity as a part of that as well, because it's when you seek out perspectives from different kinds of people and not just people like you that you're going to get great benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Kathy, did you want to add?
So let me, first of all, just give you an exercise that I use. I've written several books on the side on rebooting your life and reinventing, and one of the things that we came up with was what we call the circle of trust. And if you remember the Meet the Fockers movie with Robert De Niro, and the eye thing, and the circle, Adam Sandler was outside the circle of trust. But we took that and built a bullseye. and ask people to put in the very center the names of the people that have their back, that they could tell them anything or pretty much anything, and they'd support them. They might not agree with them, but they'd support them. They knew that they could trust that they had their best interests. The second circle, the second area, was for people you really worked with and liked well, but maybe, maybe they're work colleagues and you don't tell them personal things, or they're personal people and they don't understand your work things, but you know that they have good intentions. And then the third level is like associates, people that you work with or that you might know in the industry and so forth. And those are your three circles that you really want to spend your time with and that you want to build the trust relationship with. Everybody else is outside, and those people outside are the ones that you might enjoy going to a party with them or go to a movie or go to dinner, but you don't want to spend that much time with them, and you don't want to invest in trying to build that trust relationship because, A, you don't have that much time, and B, it's more important to focus on the people in the middle. So I use that as a model to think about that trusting people also involves getting to know them. And some of the things, and I'm going to give you an example of a good friend that I have that Mary has gotten to meet. Loretta Argrett, African-American, born in Mississippi, in Greenwood, Mississippi. She ended up being the Assistant Attorney General for Tax in the Clinton administration. And she's older than I am. She's about 10, 12 years older. But she was the best friend of my boyfriend, who was Caucasian, and they were lawyers and worked together in a law firm. And John, my fiance, died with brain cancer, and Loretta and I had become friends. In fact, when we met, I was afraid Loretta wouldn't like me, and Loretta was afraid I wouldn't like her, and we had dinner together, and we just instantly bonded. And then my fiance, John, kept saying, well, wait a minute, I knew her first. Well, anyway, Loretta today, we travel together all the time. We did I'm remarried, and with my husband did a Mississippi blues barbecue and civil rights trip, and we've got a trip coming up to Puerto Rico, and but she and I have become best friends. And she told me I was the first white person that she ever felt like she could let down her guard with, and we talked about that and having that in-depth discussion to understand, which I did understand, why you keep your guard up, because that white person or that Asian person or whatever might say the wrong thing without even knowing they're saying the wrong thing that would hurt your feelings, or that you're not sure because there's a history of not trusting white people or people outside your community. And it works in all different ethnic groups. It's not just a black-white thing. It is in many different groups. So some of the things that help you develop that trust is, first of all, having the deep discussions and listening, traveling together or, spending time together, having experiences like the Mississippi trip was amazing because we were seeing, my husband and I, who's white, were seeing Mississippi through her eyes, and she was seeing Mississippi through our eyes, and then we would have these discussions about it. And one of the things is we stayed at this now I'm forgetting the name. It's where Morgan Freeman has his blues place in Mississippi. But anyway, it was a motel hotel that was called the Shack Up Place. And it was all shacks, which many of had been I'm sure were tenements or African-American shacks from Mississippi from the 20s and 30s that they put together in this area, and it was like a hotel. Well, it turns out movie stars stay there, the musicians that come to the blues place that Morgan Freeman owns come there. But Loretta really was initially upset because it was like staying in, probably in her mind, and we talked about this, a slave owner or a tenement shack, but we saw it as, kind of a fun and experiential thing. Well, she's a photographer also, and in the end, she had fabulous photographs, and she liked it. But it never occurred to us that she would not like it. And so these kind of discussions get at those cultural things that help. So I just say traveling together, working together, having deep discussions, and having them in a civil way are the way to build that trust and to really understand and not assume other people's perceptions. And I'll tell you one more short story. I had an International Women's Forum. We met a bunch of people from around the world, came to Santa Fe in the beginning of October, and we have dine-arounds where like 10 women from all different places come to your home, and you have discussions. And I had a woman from Canada and Ireland, and 2 from Texas, and 2 from Oklahoma, and an African-American woman from Detroit, and an African-American woman from Idaho. And so we were having this discussion, and I was telling them how I had gone to Montgomery to see the Legacy Museum and what Brian Stevenson has done there with the memorial to lynching, and how moving it was, and how everybody ought to go see it. And Sheila, the woman from Detroit, somehow brought up the driving while black. And the 2 women from Oklahoma and from Texas said, well, what's that? I've never heard that. And in my own mind, I was saying, how could you not have heard this? Because it's been in the media, and and so Sheila went on to explain how parents, are very concerned about their teenage and 20-year-old sons who are, paying attention to the speed limit and driving down the highway and might be pulled over and even shot, and how they train their kids. And you could see that, because she related as a mother to these women who had never heard of that, they understood it. And you could see kind of the light bulb going on, and it became a very civil discussion about the fears that the black community has oftentimes, in a white community. And then we got to talking about news feeds. And I don't know if they voted for Trump or not, but my presumption was they were watching Fox News or whatever the local news, that they either didn't have any African-American friends, or they were not watching the mainstream media, so they didn't know what that word meant. And that just, it really brought home to me how important it is we communicate and find ways to communicate across these different news feeds that we're getting, and even the community discussions. So anyway, I say that because I think the more that we work together, the more we travel together, the more we listen to people, the more we're civil about understanding maybe they've not heard of that, and give them the opportunity to learn that's what creates that trust.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit here from my perspective, because a lot of times from a minority perspective, it's where do you start, right? It's getting over that, getting out of that comfort zone, and how do you identify a person that is worthy of trying to build that relationship with. I know from my perspective, as I was seeking out mentors when I started my corporate career, my first mentor was my first boss, and he, Caucasian male, turned out to be one of the better people as I now look back on my career in corporate America. But of course, I was seeking out help with others. Of course, you have he was more candid with me than anyone else, but I, looking for female leadership in other people, and of course, me being the only minority in many of the spaces that I was in, I naturally wanted to seek out Caucasian females, that have achieved a certain level of success, and it becomes okay, so how do we start that conversation, and who do you identify? Because some of it is trial and error, because I mean, I'm thinking about it now, and, it still upsets me. The initial person that I chose as a particular mentor betrayed that trust. And, then it becomes how do you now try to get back on that horse to open up? Luckily, the next person was Kathy, so she made it all better. And when you're trying to make that initial step, sometimes it really depends on you making the conscious effort to get out of your comfort zone. And, for minorities that are looking to now try to develop multiple relationships, it is strategic to an extent, because you have to understand that you can't, similar to what we're talking about in the news feed, you can't live in your own echo chamber. You can't only live in the minority community or only live in the women's community without trying to understand, of the other side of things. And it gives you a more holistic picture as an individual. And sometimes it's just taking a chance. You just have to, bite your lip and say, okay, I'm going to do this. But I know, I relied on others, and I asked for advice on who I should seek out from a mentor perspective from other people. It was just a conversation and trying to have those conversations. But it takes a level of openness within yourself as an individual to want to seek out and try to understand. And then from there, you can say, oh, well, this is not that bad, or, and continue on. So I think that, and oftentimes it's said to, to understand somebody's point of view, you need to seek out somebody in that group. You have the quote unquote, what I feel like is very, very disrespectful, okay, boomer thing that was been going on lately, where it's between the millennials and the boomers, and somehow they forget about, my generation, which is, the Gen Xers. But in any event, the way this dialogue is happening, where we're not actually, listening to other people. You can't always get, advice from the person that thinks and thinks like you. You have to challenge yourself. So as you're trying to, seek out how to understand what a baby boomer's point of view may be, have a baby boomer as a, potential resource or mentor. If you're trying to understand what millennials think, well, have a particular person in that group that's a millennial that can actually be your advisor or guide, so to speak, because even those generational gaps, creates a difference in mentality. I mean, I personally sit in between. I think my children are Zers, but my brother is a millennial, and then I'm in Gen X, and then so I sit in between the boomers and the millennials, and I see both sides. And so, for me, and it's like, okay, well, I can understand both points of view because that's the way I grew up, and I've watched it change and evolve and things like that. So do you guys seek out or have those relationships with people generational types of relationships, so you can, share and understand how those groups think?
Well, I think that's really necessary. If what you really want is perspective, then finding people different than you are the people most likely to provide that to you. And trust, in talking about trust, trust is something that does not happen instantaneously. Trust happens over time. It happens through a relationship, and so you might enter into that relationship cautiously at first. And then over time, you elect to trust more and more as you know that trust is being reciprocated. I love Kathy's discussion about traveling together and getting to know each other. One of the things our company does is we lead peer advisory forums for women executives and women business owners. And these are small groups, 8 to 14 women that, meet together once a month for half a day, and it's very business oriented. But yet they get to know each other. It's also everyone is under a confidentiality agreement that joins a group, so they are free to have some pretty confidential discussions. And we do a retreat with that group once a year. And what we see in terms of the relationship pre-retreat and post-retreat is really different. When you go off and you spend 3 to 4 solid days together where you're eating your meals together, you're doing all your activities together, you're going through some exercises to help each other get to know each other better, you suddenly see this bond that is developed and a trust relationship that grows. And so trust is something built over time. It's not a one-time meeting and you have trust and now you can tell somebody anything. And so you do have to consciously develop it.
No, when I'm saying trust, and I'm sorry, part of that capacity, because we're talking, and I understand you guys, I'm at that point where I'm traveling and things like that, but, from a minority perspective, it's the fear, right? It's the fear, right, especially when you're in the beginning of your career. So it's trusting that it's not trusting it's trusting the concept that you can go to this person, not necessarily building a deeper level of, I'm telling them all my personal business, like the circle of trusting. So a lot of things, fear often stops us from seeking out those relationships.
I agree.
Yeah, and I understand that, and rightfully so. I mean, there's been enough times that, at least historically, you question. If you can get yourself to neutral, and neutral means, Janice gave a great answer on that. Neutral means you go in without just, totally trusting from the very beginning, but you build that trust over the time. The more interaction you have, the more that you're together, and you see how that relationship grows, then you can trust better. And you also learn, you brought up the idea of having advisors. Another exercise you might do is to think about who are all the kinds of advisors you need, whether it's technical advisors or healthcare or legal or financial or career or whatever, and think about who are the right people that will help you. Write down those names, and they may be friends, it might be work colleagues or whatever, but it helps you to think about that you don't go to one person for everything. So when you think about trusting someone, you want to trust them for what you need them for, which might be career advice or sponsorship within an organization or financial advice, but you might not trust them for other things, like to keep, and I'm always careful, and part of that's growing up in a small town, of, not gossiping or things. You never know when that comes back to bite you. But, building that trust over time. But you made me think, again, I think this is a great topic to think about. I tried to think about how would I tell somebody who is starting out in their career who to look for to at least feel like they could trust that they were going to treat them fairly or treat them with an equal opportunity. And it's going to be people that either have a global perspective, because if you've traveled a lot and have a global perspective, it means you understand and appreciate other cultures. So you don't come to it with a bias that, one culture or one ethnic group is better than the other. If you look at people that are involved in associations that might focus on minorities, whether it's a women's organization or a minority organization like Mary has started, or International Women's Forum, where you know that there are people that are there. They self-select that they want to learn and that they are open. If you think about what it is you need the mentoring for, and think about who's the best advisor. And I always think mentoring goes two ways. I learn as much from Mary as hopefully she learns from me. It's not like all one way. You learn from
I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, and then, also just look at their social media posts, because you can tell a lot about people in terms of what they put out there. So it's a way to kind of figure out who are the people I want to have in my circle. And again, think about that circle of trust and how you add people to that. I also think that in the end, it's worth the risk of trusting than to be so non-trusting that you shut people out. It's just like loving. It's better to love someone and get hurt than it is to not love at all.
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice. And I know we can go on and on. I think I want to give the audience an opportunity. If there's anyone out there that have any questions, we only have 5 minutes left, so wanted to give that opportunity for you guys to ask any questions. This is normally a shy group. I rarely get questions, which is why I tend to let the speakers continue to talk. Anybody else out there with a question? No. Well, closing remarks by either you, Kathy, or you, Tanis.
Well, Mary, I just appreciate what you're doing and fostering the conversation, because that's how trust begins.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And having this kind of discussion, I just really, and I think you will do it at your conference, but having a panel that talks about how you really, what are the ways that you reach out and establish that trust and grow that relationship. And I just think it's a really important thing. And, we all have made, as you said, the mistake of we've trusted people that turn out to be not trustworthy. We've had that experience where people will, and the betrayal hurts, especially if you really trust somebody and they betray you. But you learn from that, and it's far better to trust than it is to not.
Yeah, absolutely. It didn't prevent me. It was a lesson that was learned. So I want to thank you both for taking the opportunity this Friday evening before the holiday to have this conversation, and we'll definitely continue this discussion. I think it's a conversation continually worth having. And I thank you guys so much. And for everybody on the call, I wish you guys a happy holiday season and a very, very wonderful and happy new year. Thanks again.